Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a series of videos featuring two guys talking about designing better miniature games. One of those guys is Glenn, that's him, and one of those guys is me, the person talking, uh, whose name is Mike. I should probably say that as well. We have been, over the last few episodes now, we've been getting a little bit philosophical about some of the terminology and definitions of the stuff that goes into making miniature games. Um, and we spoke last time on this podcast about some ideas about simulation and emulation being the detail between making clockwork reality happen in your miniature games versus making movie magic happen in your miniature games. And as we were talking about that, the topic sort of kept pressing itself on my mind, but I didn't want to start it, about how quite a lot of games that I would think of as simulation games are quite detailed, and they achieve simulation by having quite a lot of detailed mechanics and quite a lot of things that you might think of as movie magic, like things that are sort of going for genre tropes, can, particularly more recently, be quite sort of impressionistic and abstract in their mechanics. But as Glenn's grimacing is amply demonstrating for the viewer on YouTube, they're not really at all related, and you can have extremely detailed emulation. My mind turns to the realm of chaos tables that Glenn and I were stumbling through some months ago. But you can also have, very effective simulation based on quite abstracted mechanics. In fact, you have to, and even very detailed, realistic games, if I might say so, like Harpoon, obviously, ignore and abstract vast quantities of real information and battlefield activity and what thousands of individual humans are up to on various battleships in modern naval engagements, because they have to, because there's not time to manage all that stuff. So I guess I just wanted to, yes, sorry, Glenn's, go ahead, man.
Well, no, okay, look, for me, it's not that simulations are inherently more detailed than sort of more movie logic games.
No,
It's
yeah,
about
I agree.
it's about what it is that they tend to expend their detail upon.
Hmm.
So, as I was saying in the last conversation, if you're doing like a movie logic game, like, okay, we've got two gunslingers in the Old West and they're drawing their gun, and it's like walking out to the gun shoot, gunfighting area. Who cares, etc. This, I don't care, don't care, don't care, don't care. Now they're starting to go for their gun, and and time slows right down, and we've got a resolution system for the finger twitching near the trigger. We've got a resolution system for where their eyes are looking. We've got a resolution system for the beads of sweat coming down their forehead.
Mm.
Extremely movie logical, incredibly detailed.
Can be, yeah, 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 exactly.
Whereas I think sometimes for realistic games, simulationist games, it's like every bit of minutiae gets equal weighting for its detailing. It's like
Hmm.
tracking the ammo on a gun that you don't really care about. It's like ninth gun, it never does anything, but you still got to track the ammo and the heat on the weapon and all these sorts of things. I think that sort of detailing is what makes something feel like it is within the genre of reality, because it's like I don't I don't care, I don't need to care, but the fact that I'm tracking it, oh, that must be like verisimilitude, because who cares about tracking these things? Whereas, yeah, no, I totally think that like simulation can have swaves of abstraction. Look, it's like, in reality, if we count up the number of like men and the tech level of their weapons and the place they're fighting, we don't need to play the game, because we have history that will tell us who
Mm.
will win that battle. And the
Hmm.
best possible simulation is just to calculate who's there, look at, historical reality and go, well, that side's going to win. It's obviously going to win. It's got way more guns and men and etc. etc. Bothering to see if the underdog loses. The underdog loses is reality. We may as well abstract the whole game, find
Yeah.
out who's the underdog, and skip it. For true simulation.
No, right. And so I think that, like, for me that it's super tempting to equate these two things together. And you're exactly right that, like, where you put the detail draws the attention of the players, and where you draw the attention of the players is where your game is actually happening, and that's what the game is about. And so, where I think, it's easy to say, well, this game is like comparatively between games, it's easy to say, well, this one is more detailed, it's more finicky, it's got more bits and bobs, it's got more rules to learn. This one is more abstract, it's simpler. And that is important for players to understand. And, as players, we maybe prefer an amount of detail, or, on one end of the spectrum or another. I think what's more interesting is, as you suggest, like inside a game, where is the relative levels of detail inside the game? Where have you applied detail to the mechanics? And as you say, and I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, like whether you apply that detail strategically, specifically with, like, with the filmmaker's eye, or whether you are just saying, well, this is a detailed game, ergo I shall put detail anywhere. But to call back to sort of Gygax's slash OSR type role playing systems from the last conversation, there is sort of like, there is a hope, I think, in an alternative form of gaming where, by simulating everything to a degree, um, like equally, you allow the sort of clockwork reality to bubble out things that are interesting, as opposed to a world where you have very much designed, like, well, I'm going to put a lot of detail into the sweat dripping down the cowboy's face mechanic, and not very much detail into the which ammo did they choose and which shop did they buy the ammo from. And so you're very much, like, as an auteur, you're very much saying, well, here is where I choose the narrative interest to come from. Whereas, to a degree, the OSR is saying, no, 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 let us create a real feeling world, and the world and the people's actions within the world will tell us what's interesting. And so we don't need to select, which of course is nonsense, because you also have like very deliberate design decisions about, well, I'm going to track torches, but I'm not going to track the thinness of my boot leather for
Yeah.
the adventurer's boots.
Yeah, no, it's like, yeah, totally. It's like, whatever the cinema verite thing of like, well, yeah, but you're still deciding where you point the camera.
Yeah.
You've done something here. And it's like there's a bit of a legendary terrible Kickstarter called Galactica Magnifica. Um, and one of the things that this Kickstarter is doing, along with claiming to build literal spaceships to, go out to other solar systems, is that it's going to make a 1-for-1 scale and timeline simulation of the entire Milky Way and all its inhabitants, so that you can play this computer game with this game, and it will take everything will take the exact same amount of time that it would do in real life. So you're going to go to the airport in order to fly to Mars, and you're going to get stuck in traffic, and it will take you as long as it would take you getting stuck in traffic, and etc. etc. And it's like, obviously that's insane and terrible. That's obviously a terrible, terrible, terrible game, because it's also not set in the future when he's making it. It's set today. So what you would get to play is this. You would just be playing this, and it would be awful.
Mm-hmm.
And it is like, I think this is one of the reasons that it's like the simulation and reality games are still a genre, because part of that sort of being interested in the minutiae is saying, no, no, no. The point is that in this like genre, you don't get to skip to the good bit. Just like in life, you don't get to skip to the good bit. Don't get to ignore things that don't matter. You don't get to not have to sit in traffic. You don't have to, never have to go to the toilet, because we are living in this certain sort of genre, and this certain sort of genre is everything is as important as everything else. Everything is worth paying attention to, and so we're going to pay attention to everything. And so the emotional effect of the player, of them being able to go, oh wow, this is just like reality, this is just like life, isn't it amazing that I'm experiencing the reality of what it is like to be a soldier in World War II, a commander in the Pacific, I love feeling like I'm actually experiencing that. But of course you're not anything close to it. But because we've not allowed you to decide what is important and what to focus on, or we've decided for you, or we've stepped in as an auteur and
Exactly. Like
reality.
in order to give that experience to the player of what it might have been like to like, make decisions as a commander in the Pacific Theater, like you have to provide the decisions that are interesting in that and ignore the decisions that aren't interesting. Like whether or not you take sugar in your coffee is not relevant and interesting. It's not, it wouldn't be featured in the textbook, it wouldn't be in the movie, and so it's not in the game either. And so as game makers with a sort of continuing this kind of filmmaking borrowing of terms, like we've got to focus, we've got to choose where we point the camera, we've got to focus on the things that matter. And I think and I think that where we put mechanics is our camera.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things about about us being, well, I mean, I think more maybe gamic, filmic style sort of auteur game designers is that we have the armor of like, well, suspension of disbelief.
Right.
Okay, it doesn't make any sense. It's unrealistic. I don't care. I am making a game. Suspension of disbelief. Get over it. Move on. If you're
Yeah.
making like a full-on simulation-y simulation that's meant to be super realistic, as soon as somebody
You
says,
shouldn't listen to this podcast. We don't know anything about it.
"Oh yeah, no, we are not the people to ask," but part of that is almost like I wouldn't say afraid of, but the fact that not having that armor, it's very sort of exposing, I think, for those sorts of games because. As soon as somebody says, well, that's not realistic, I should have had to track the ammo on my blah blah, remember that battle where that thing ran out and 1,000 men died, and you're like, yeah, I didn't create all of reality within this game. I am at fault. I have no shield for it. It's like it's lovely being able to say, yeah, I didn't simulate that because I don't care, because my
Mm,
game doesn't care. And if
yeah.
you did care about that, maybe I'm wrong in having like led you down the wrong path, but that's just not what the game's about. It's not what this game is about. Suck it. Whereas if you're making a game about reality, everybody is right when they come at
Mm,
you with those things. Everybody is correct. Every single thing you left out that they missed should have been in. And that's like that's a really frightening prospect as a game designer, where not
mm,
not being able to say like, yeah, whimsy and magic and baloney is the reason I did it,
mm.
whereas yeah, having to
And I
say
think the idea of this dramatic focus for me, like I've said it already in this conversation, but it does feel very local and specific to a game. Like I don't think we're saying you should make more detailed mechanics in the places that are important to your game, and you should hear that as a specific level of detail because we don't have an empirical level of detail that's relevant for that comment. It's just like if if you're going to make any rules, that's going to be where the player's attention and their gaze is drawn, and quite often you'll just want some other things to just be completely automatic or completely irrelevant. And yeah, making those decisions I think is mostly instinctual for most of us, and I think to a degree it's like it's fairly instinctual because we're playing in a relatively limited set of like, well, it's mostly shooting each other and axing each other in the face type of games, and so we've kind of got a fairly standard set of like what we care about. And it's why I haven't finished editing the video for it yet, but like your game Borders and Black Flags, which says we're not going to punch each other in the face, we're going to sort of swing, I'm going to swing you bodily into the path of a moving crate so that you get knocked off the boat or squashed by it or whatever. Like the reason that feels so strange is that it bucks the conventions of where we think the mechanics should be. And so I guess to a degree, this is a bit like coming back to that conversation that says, should I always put rules for knifing each other? And the way that I think I can now express that was, well, would you point your camera at the knifing of people, or is that something that you would have off shot, off camera, as a like as an event that happens because it triggers the thing that you're actually interested in, which is the subject of your creation?
yeah, and I suppose like one of the reasons that this is possibly like a little tricky to sort of, I know, explain, teach, whatever it is that we do here, is that it's a level about like
Masticate is what we do.
is that I think to a degree it's like it's about sort of personal. It's about confidence. It's about sort of having the confidence in your design and the sorts of things you are confident in. Because like I say, I don't want to do a simulationist game because I don't feel like I would have the armor of saying this is what I care about. But then for a certain sort of person, a certain sort of designer, being able to say, well, this is what I care about, and
Mm.
using that as armor is harder than going like, no, I'm trying to craft and create all these sorts of different things at once and in reality. And I tell you, again, the things that come up again and again on the channel is like knowing your game and knowing what
Mm.
it cares about and having like a strong early sort of design document brief and setting down what it's about and coming back to those touchstones and going, oh yeah, this is what my game cares about, this is what I said I cared about, this is what I said I was trying to do. Let's not be, because it's so sort of seductive to put in an extra rule for this thing that will sometimes be cool and sometimes be interesting, and some people want in there because it is a reality or a thing that's happening. So why
Mm.
occurring on the tabletop? And it's so important to go back again and again and again to those things and go, no, no, I just can't. I can't care about everything. I can't.
Yeah, and thinking about your ludicrous example of the Kickstarter, like, and framing it in kind of video game terms, like it's sort of like saying, well, you know, you have you have a kind of game that you want to make, and you have a kind of story that you want to tell, and you have lots of ideas for other features that you could put in your game, but each of those features needs implementing in your rules code, and therefore every one of those features that you add, like, it creates the possibility of bugs and and like inadvertently ruining the player experience because they're focusing on a slightly less polished part of your thing because you thought, oh, it would be cool to have like a boarding system, even though it's not really important to have a boarding system, but like I didn't spend as much time and now there's kind of crumminess in that mechanic. So yeah, like that design document and that objectives sort of giving you focus, and then having the confidence to resist not only your own ideas, but also what your playtesters and the people around you are saying would be cool, and saying, yeah, but that's just more bloat. It's more features that I don't need. It's more bugs that I'm going to introduce. It's more stuff that I have to balance. It's more distraction for the player that's pulling them away from the core point and the sort of core story of the game.
Yeah, and I think we say sort of, it's one of the things I end up finding myself returning to quite often is that there are 100 great versions of any given game that are
Mm.
your version of your game, and like
Do you
loads.
do you ever feel sad about that?
No, me personally, no.
I'm quite sad about it because like I really like A Billion Suns, and there's another Billion Suns that I'm sort of sorrowful for.
I don't know. I think, funnily enough, this is maybe a sort of a side conversation. Given that one of my intro into these sort of this world of designing and putting games out there was spending a lot of time defending your decisions to other people about Gaslands,
Yeah,
and so I feel like I got quite grounded in this thing of saying, yes, there's tons of good versions of this thing that isn't this thing,
right.
this version of it, but screw it, this is the version of it, and this is why it was done, and therefore that is the thing I'm going to go to bat for because that's what I'm doing now, and so I'm going to go to bat for it, even if. And sometimes I've been in conversations defending things that I told you you shouldn't do that you still did to other people, saying it was the right decision because that's what it is now. Because
Yeah,
and again, and I've said a few times, what I try to do now in our relationship is advocate for something and then walk away from it. And
right.
and if it's your game and you make the decision, it's like either version was right. Very often, either version was right in design, but it's like this is a thing and this is what that thing means, and that could be interesting for these reasons, but you doesn't need to be in there because nothing needs to be in there. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I think like just looping back right round to the beginning of this conversation, like there are there are mechanics that you want to abstract, and there are mechanics that you want to build detail into. And I think what I am quite confident now, and I think you invented this term dramatic focus, which has just clicked so much for me because it's about where do you want the drama and the narrative to emerge from, and it feels like a camera pointed at things. And so I really like this idea that where you choose to put the more detailed mechanics is where you direct the player's attention, and therefore it's what the dramatic focus of your game is. And whether that is a realistic simulation game or a highfalutin fantasy shoot 'em out, it doesn't matter. The mechanics and the detail equates to the narrative, to the dramatic focus. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, rules are where your player's going to be looking, and so the longer you want them to look at something, the more rules you put in there, and the more detailed you make them. It's how you manipulate them. It's how you get that's how you get them where you want.
Yeah, and also like if you put that at the center of the spider's web, so lots of other things connect to it, that's also another way of building complexity. But yeah,
Absolutely. So yeah, that's our conversation about dramatic focus, the
I
focus
think
of the
so. Yeah.
game, the detailing versus the abstraction, the timing, the slowing, the story beats we keep talking about. I'm sure, you know, if people are watching this conversation, they've played games. I'm sure they've played games, but I'm sure you've played games that had a certain sort of dramatic rhythm that maybe felt out of joint from what the game was trying to do for you, or maybe it absolutely chimed and you're like, oh yes, it's exactly like a blah 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 blah. Please tell us about those games in either direction. You know, did you like House Rule one that didn't work, so that had the beats you were thirsting for? Did you, you know, use a system that worked brilliantly for you in other genres and maybe it fell off again? Tell us about these things and more in the comments section. Hit the like and subscribes when you're down there, and then swing by the Discord, have that conversation again. There's lots of people having these conversations in the Discord, lots of talented, smart, designery people that you can bounce things off of. And while you're following links in the down there part of the video, follow the one to Mike's Patreon, give Mike money, say he's a good boy and that he should spend it on whatever he wants, and it will make everybody very, very happy, yourself included, I'm sure. Um,
Promise I'll spend it on food for my children. How about that?
if you earmark it specifically, that bit goes on for his children. But for now, from this episode of Rule of Carnage, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and bye 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 bye.
Bye bye.